Good morning. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to all of you to the November 7th meeting of the General Obligation Bond Executive Committee. I hereby officially call the meeting to order. I'd like to start with the introduction of our Spanish interpretation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning. My name is Elsie Duarte, and along with my colleague Carmen Cota, we will be servicing as interpreters in today's meeting. I will now introduce myself to our Spanish-speaking audience and review some guidelines. Buenos días, mi nombre es Elsie Duarte, junto con mi colega Carmen Cota. Estaremos sirviéndoles hoy como intérpretes en la reunión de hoy. Al momento de hacer un comentario público, de favor les pedimos que hable despacio, con claridad, y deténgase después de cada pocas oraciones para interpretarle de la manera más completa posible. Gracias por su atención. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome, and thank you. There will be a public comment period during item 3 of today's agenda. To ensure that the committee can make headway today on recommendations, I am limiting the speakers to 1 minute each. Speakers will not be allowed to pool their time today. I'm also asking that any organizations select only one of their members to speak on behalf of the organization. I want to ensure that the committee can hear a broad range of public feedback and that time is not dominated by any one item. So I will ask that you only speak if your points have not been covered by a prior speaker. If you are attending in person and would like to speak, you will need to sign up at the kiosk located at the entrance to the council chamber. Once item 3 of today's agenda begins, you will not be able to sign up for comment. And if you are attending virtually or watching a recording and would like to speak at a future meeting, please note that you need to register at least 2 hours in advance of the start of the meeting. So with that, our first item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes of the Executive Committee meeting on October 31st. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
A motion and a second?
Second.
Any comments? Those in favor, please let it be known by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So moved. I'd like to make some additional introductory remarks. During our last meeting, the Executive Committee adopted the City Manager's recommended targets as a starting point for reducing Subcommittee's $717 million recommendation down to the $500 million program limit. Targets were adopted with flexibility. As we work through this process, we may find the need to revisit our recommendations for a subcommittee or adjust targets. Through actions in the last meeting, we have reduced 2 subcommittees' recommendations down to the targets. We will continue that process today. I would like us to compile recommendations for at least 3 additional subcommittees today. We will start with Housing, Human Services, and Homelessness, then Public Safety, and then Parks and Recreation. As another reminder, we only have 2 meetings scheduled after today to finalize our recommendations. I plan to reserve time toward the end of the meeting to hear public comments, and I will give committee members time to respond to public comment before we adjourn the meeting. So with that, let me just say that to recap the process that we will be following, staff will be tracking our deliberations and showing the impact of changes live during the meeting. As members have recommendations, I will look to the committee as a whole for informal consensus. Staff will only reflect changes in the spreadsheet that have consensus of the committee. I will also ask that members propose 1 item at a time, and we will only consider 1 item at a time. We will wait to have a clear consensus built before making any actual motions or taking the votes. We will now continue our deliberation process, and we'll start with Housing, Human Services, and Homelessness as the next department to review. And I would like to turn this over now to Subcommittee Chairman Devine.
Madam Chair, before we go there, can I just ask one thing or say one thing for clarification, which is when we adopted the targets at the last meeting, it was as a place to focus and try to get to, and we didn't make a final conclusion about those numbers. I think we had agreed and said publicly that the motion was, meant to be a starting point for us, and that we could go back and revisit after we're all done with trying to get to the targets with the various committees. There may be balancing issues or other issues that I think we had said we might want to go back to at some point. So I just wanted to clarify that because you didn't say it, and also for the audience, if that's the way you understand it too.
I would say it a little bit differently than that. So we first adopted to work within the $500 million bond with flexibility. And so the subcommittee chairmen have taken that advice, have prioritized, and through discussion and involvement have made their recommendations, which we have voted on. But we've done so with flexibility. After everyone has this opportunity, and if the subcommittee chairmen want to have that discussion, then we're going to have that ability. And then we will make our final recommendations to City Council, and there could be additional deliberation at that level.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to thank the Housing, Human Service, and Homelessness Subcommittee members and Vice Chair Suzanne Feaster, and the City of Phoenix staff who provided a significant volume of requested information and financial documents. The city staff allocated the HH&H Committee approximately $62 million of recommended projects that they felt critical to preserving, renovating, subsidizing, and creating new housing options. The city manager recommended $63 million for the HH&H projects, and the subcommittee recommended $102 million in projects, a recommendation almost 38% higher. The Housing and Human Service and Homelessness Committee, with numerous comments from the City of Phoenix residents, housing organizations, and coalitions, expressed that without a stable, safe, and affordable place to live, individuals and families are unable to utilize other services and amenities provided by the other subcommittees. There is significant data detailing the critical need to preserve current affordable housing stock and the critical need for thousands more shelter and affordable housing units, all supported by the Phoenix's housing plan. It is an impossible situation when you're asked to choose between sheltering homeless, preserving thousands of existing City of Phoenix affordable housing units, critical new units, housing innovation, and expanding life-saving, community-based human services. Our committee also used the ranking and prioritization tool provided by the City of Phoenix, and although not unanimous, 8-1, considerable time and discussion went into the rankings. The H&H staff assigned to our committee presented, which I'd like to ask them to talk about in a minute, alternative sources of funding that included over $70 million for homeless projects, including both congregate and non-congregate units, some that have already come online and many more to be opening this year and next. There remain ongoing future concerns on the operations of those units. Our committee felt it was important to bring a spotlight to homelessness. The $22 million for shelter was originally two projects, $7.5 million and $15 million, that were recommended, and also included $8 million of ongoing operations. Because there are alternative resources for shelter and the ongoing concern for operations, this must be taken into consideration in achieving a recommendation that fits into the $500 million GEO bond project and reducing the recommendation of the HH&H subcommittee. I want to particularly thank the Southwest Center for actively advocating at every meeting for their much-needed expansion and services. Reducing the amount of recommended projects supported by our committee is beyond difficult. When you think of the number of people that are unhoused or have lost or are losing their housing from rising rents. Therefore, I request that a higher allocation be considered for housing, human services, and homelessness. I do recommend funding the HH&H projects by the committee ranking with consideration of alternative funding for shelter, and to continue to work with the projects to seek those projects, perhaps unfunded, to seek other alternative funds to ensure new housing, innovation, and services are supported. Those are my comments. Thank you. And I'm going to ask the staff to present on the alternative sources of funding.
Thank you very much. So we'll turn this over to staff presentation.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the Executive Committee. I really want to acknowledge the work of the subcommittee, and particularly our chair, Dee Dee Devine, and they were very strongly in favor of additional funds, especially for shelters. And we as staff had originally provided a recommendation that from our capital needs assessment based on other funding sources that were available for shelters. And so we did provide an additional 2 projects for the congregate and non-congregate shelters, which was combined and which ended up in the rankings. As Chairwoman Devine mentioned, and in our memo dated October 26th to the Bond Committee, we did lay out the alternative funding sources available for affordable housing and homelessness. And I won't go through those in detail, but that totaled $88.9 million in total for those funding sources, primarily from the ARPA, American Rescue Plan Act funding. Of that $88.9 million, $70.9 million was set aside, earmarked specifically for shelter and capital needs to address homelessness. This amount does enable us to cite some additional facilities, which we are already in the process of doing. We have not stood up all those facilities. We have a couple years to do that. We're going to do it as soon as possible because of the tremendous need. But I just want to note that the amount set aside for and available, of alternative funding sources available for affordable housing is not nearly as significant, and we don't have as many options for where to identify funding for those projects that are the choice project specifically that's in the ranking. So I hope that addresses your question, Madam Chair. That's what I would say in terms of, again, it's impossible to say one is more important than the other, shelters versus affordable housing. But from staff's perspective, we do at least have a significant amount of funding available right now that we will be putting into service over the next few years.
Thank you. With that information, did you have other comments, Chairman Devine, or should we open this up to the committee for any questions?
No, go ahead and open it to the committee.
So any of the members want to make comments, this would be the time.
I know how hard it is to make these decisions, and if do you want me to put a motion on the floor for what you did, or are you going to put the motion?
Go ahead and
Okay.
make the motion.
Okay. I would put the motion on the floor with the changes brought about by Ms. Yazzie, and note that ARPA funds, or not ARPA, the funds that are used for the shelter are alternative funds that are ready, they're there, and I think that's very good because we need them, but affordable housing is so important that I can see the changes. So I would put your motion on the floor.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, if it would be all right, just so that staff is clear on what the motion is and we can reflect the changes on the screen for the committee, can we go ahead and restate exactly what the motion entails?
The motion would entail items 1 through 4 being funded by the money set aside for this project for the homeless committee. It would be affordable housing property prevention. Phase 1, Cesar Chavez Senior Center, McDowell Senior Center renovation, and acquisition renovation of property or for shelter.
So I'm sorry, just to clarify, what we're saying is you want to include projects 1 through 4 to reach the target of 63 million.
Yes, ma'am.
All projects below Project 4, which would be projects 5 through 8, would be considered as part of the alternative or supplemental funding that was just mentioned by Gina.
Yeah, I want to make sure that,
I'd like to just have it presented by ranking,
okay.
by our original ranking, which I can read. Would you like
It should
me-
be on the screen.
That's what I'm reading from. Mhm. Was this the revised
So-
ranking?
So I was recommending by that the ranking with consideration for number 4 that we have alternative funds for shelter.
Okay, that's what I put forward.
Okay, so we would be removing project number 4 for the 22.5 million, but you would still like to consider projects 1, 2, 3, and 5? Is that correct?
Well, I'd like to consider them all, but to prioritize them with funds that are available in that H&H subcommittee with the consideration that there's alternative funding for shelter by prioritization.
So are we clear?
To be a dollar amount?
I think what would be helpful is
I'm not clear.
yeah, so I think what would be helpful is if the motion were to include to advance to the city council projects 1, 2, 3, and 5, and we can demonstrate that on the screen, having project 4 be considered as part of the supplemental funding that was mentioned by staff. And we can put that on the screen to see what that totals.
Yeah.
It's 62.9 million. $62.
Is that accurate?
So it still has, well, what I'm seeing on my screen still has number 4 as shelter.
It's zeroed out, though, Chairwoman, or Chair, Subcommittee Member.
So if you look at that second column that says current amount,
Oh,
you
I
can
see.
see project 4
okay,
is
thank you.
reflected now at 0.
Thank you. Yes, that's correct.
So then what
so are we
staff,
now-
I would recommend if I could, the motion should reflect that the committee, or the motion, it would include projects 1 through 5 as reflected on the screen.
So moved.
Excuse me, but as I look at this now, it looks like there's an ability to fund item 6 as well and stay within the budget or within the recommended amounts?
That's correct.
So it would be items 1 through 6 with item 5 reflected but zeroed, or item 4 reflected but zeroed out in funds.
Does that clarify what the city
Yes, thank you.
recommending? And then our second.
I'll second.
Okay, now I can open it up for comments.
Madam Chair, just more of a clarification question. So the items that are not in the motion, is there a possibility they could be funded through alternate funding, or because that gap financing is more on the affordable housing side, that's not a possibility? Maybe more of a question for staff, Regina.
Apologies. To clarify, because I'm not sure what your question is. Are you asking if
7 and 8, items 7 and 8 could also be funded through these alternate funding sources as described earlier? Or do they fall off completely?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, at this point, we do have additional alternative funding sources for the gap financing in the ARPA dollars. We are still exploring other options for the expansion of the Parsons Center.
Thank you. Other comments?
Two quick questions. One, just to follow up on Devney's question or your answer. How much funding do you have for affordable housing gap financing?
$12 million.
Okay, thank you. And then my second question is for the subcommittee chair. did I realize you were looking at a different universe at the time, but did your subcommittee have awareness of this ARPA money when you did your ranking? Or is this new information for you?
We did have the alternative funding. We were aware of that at the time of ranking. I believe it was the subcommittee's strong desire to really put a spotlight on homelessness.
Thank you. Other comments? Yes.
I have a question about the project number 8. Is this the project that we have the 2 letters of support for? This is the Parsons Center project that there are letters of support from Senator Sinema and Congressman Gallego. And I heard significant public comment over the last several executive committee meetings. So I'm just wanting to clarify that.
Would staff make a comment on that?
Yes, Madam Chair and Member Torres, that's correct. You have letters before you, and they were sent via email with the indication of the support for that project.
Thank you. Other comments?
I don't have any other comments. I know that that's what the committee struggled with, was the importance and critical need of all the projects in our committee, making it very difficult to reduce.
Madam Chairman, just one comment before we vote. On the Parsons, it would be my hope that if there's any money that drops to the bottom line, that would be one of the first priorities.
We'll have the minutes reflect that. Other comments? We have a motion and a second. Those in favor, please let it be known by saying aye.
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 Opposed?
Aye.
The motion carries. Thank you very much to all of the members and the community who have been so involved in this. We're going to go to the next committee now, Public Safety, and I would like to turn this over to our chairman for the subcommittee chairman for Public Safety.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Morning. My name is Steve Berline. Honored to be here. This committee has done so much work over so many years. I'm going to back up to the 2006 CIP. We still have projects in police and fire from back then that weren't completed. Under interim Mayor Thelda Williams, the need was identified to be so drastic for police and fire that they considered a public safety bond, just a police and fire bond. That was held back to include the rest of the city, and here we are today. We are looking at a bond where public safety generally represents, I would say, 70% of most municipal budgets. We're looking at a bond program moving forward where public safety is representing 27% of this bond. So we're team players, right? We get it. It's not just police and fire. Everything else matters to make this city great. But most of our work was done as far as prioritizing these projects because the leadership of the Phoenix Police Department and the Fire Department have been working on this for years. We were given and heard reports on 15 different projects. Our committee debated them, listened to comments from the community, the citizens, the employee groups of police and fire, and the subcommittee narrowed it down to 10, which was significantly over the 27% of this bond program. But the subcommittee felt it was so important, these projects were so prioritized, they wanted to move forward with the 10. So that's where we're at in front of us. If we were to look at where the city manager needs us to get and cut it off, it would be at the number 6 project. And that would keep us at the 27%. We are hearing testimony and we are receiving letters from all of these committees, and everybody needs more. Police and fire needs more. We certainly do. Police and fire was there. We were going to run an initiative to hire police officers and firefighters. At the time, Greg Stanton was the mayor here. He wanted to run a transit initiative. We backed off of our initiative, supported the transit initiative. So police and fire have been team players through this entire process. And here we are looking at 27%. We're expecting 27% of this GEO bond to go to police and fire. Things need to move around. That's fine. If this bond goes over $500 million, public safety expects to have a seat at the table and be well represented. We've been sitting back and quiet, understanding where we're at, but we have some concerns now moving forward, and possibly being reduced to provide more revenue to other sections of this bond program. So I need to touch on, as we look at these fire stations especially, that they're bursting at the seams. They're too small. They need more resource to run more calls. I'm going to give you an example of how busy this fire department is. I was with my wife on the way to, we were going out, and we came across a car pedestrian, a senior citizen who was struck by a vehicle, and the bystanders were doing CPR. We were less than a quarter of a mile away from the closest fire station. But that fire station was on a call 2 blocks away from this incident. It took another 20 minutes doing CPR on the street and a citizen. And that happens every single day because we are so busy. These projects need to get done. They've been pushed back for far too long. So I think I've made my point. I mean, I am real passionate about it. Up to this point, feeling like 27% of a GEO bond for a department, public safety, which is, again, generally 70% of a municipal budget. It seems a little short, but it's important that we address the other needs of the city. Every parks, libraries, homeless, everything is important to us also. But we all knew this going in, that there was going to be more demand than there was going to be revenue to meet it. So with that, I think we have staff here to give a little bit of a report, and I'm more than happy to answer more questions if they come up. Thank you.
May I ask staff to now give their report?
Madam Chair, before we begin, I want to provide a little bit of context just to address some of what Subcommittee Chairman Berline referenced. Back in 2019, I believe, Councilwoman at the time, Acting Mayor Thelda Williams, convened a Public Safety Oversight Committee to look at the bond program for a public safety bond only. At that time, we were looking at about the same thing, about a $500 million bond program. However, the one caveat to that was police required $350 million at that time to build a brand new headquarters. So that would have consumed the lion's share of a $500 million bond program. During that time, that bond program was set aside because of everything that we talked about previously with COVID and just the state of the economy at that point in time. However, sometimes good things happen when you don't expect them. And what happened during that time was 100 West Washington, the former Wells Fargo building, became available. We were able to purchase that 28-story tower for $46 million. And then we also asked the council, I specifically asked the council because I knew how much of the bond program would be consumed by renovating that facility. I asked them to allow me to take that out of what would have been this bond program and to do a separate excise tax. So public safety, not reflected in this bond program, I just want to make sure that everybody is fully aware and versed in $46 million to buy the building and another $150 to renovate it. That's $296 million. So if I add that $196 to overall this $500 million program, they sit at about $47 million worth of the financing that we're taking on in this same time frame. And I just want to make sure that everybody is aware of that, because if we left that facility in this program, there would be a lot less for everybody. So I don't want that to go unnoticed, because I think it's important for our community as well as you to understand, just like we're talking about other financing sources and other alternate forms of revenue, to understand that. The other thing that I want to make sure that Lori and Scott touch base on is something that will be going to subcommittee this month, talking about additional positions that we're adding mid-year specifically for fire to address some of the things that Steve just talked about. The other thing that is not necessarily reflected but will be reflected in that report is we've talked about doing 4 of these programs over the next 20 years, spaced 5 years apart. In that, the intent, my design, is that we have one fire station built every year, or essentially 4 to 5 fire stations would be in each and every one of those bond programs. So at the end of 20 years, we will have 20 additional fire stations that come with additional firefighters and all of those other things. And that is more than we've done over the last 2 decades. So I think it's important to keep that in context. I think from a management perspective, and I can let Scott Walker talk about this, I think 1 fire station being added a year is adequate. And we just talked about that the other day. But Lori and Scott can talk about the report that's going to subcommittee this month.
Thank you very much. That was very important insight for us to hear. May I turn it over to the rest of the staff now?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and members of the members of the Executive Committee. I would also like to thank our subcommittee and especially Chair Berline for the amount of work that has been done in preparing for this discussion today. As has been alluded to, there's been a lot of attention paid to the needs of public safety, and obviously the needs outweigh the ability to address those needs at one point in time. However, we are comfortable with where the line falls as it relates to the city manager's as it relates to the city manager's recommendations, which would allow for completion of projects 1 through 5 on the recommendations list, taking into consideration what the city manager just outlined related to the police headquarters and the renovations associated that have been able to be completed outside of this project. And in addition to that, Wednesday of this week, we will be presenting to the Public Safety and Justice Subcommittee a plan, which I'll let Executive Assistant Chief Scott Walker speak to in a little bit more detail, but we are going to be requesting that the subcommittee recommend to the full council a mid-year addition of positions in order to help reduce response times with the existing facilities that we have, and also leverage what we've been able to receive in recent years related to the SAFER grant positions. And so we believe that that is going to help mitigate some of the need in the interim and allow for some improved response times in the immediate future, and then adding, again, those additional stations over the next several years with the bond program. And then we will also be recommending that we add 4 to 6 stations in the future bond programs, which if we go forward with the proposed time frame of a new bond program every 5 years or so, that will allow us to get much closer to where we need to be within the next 20 years in adding essentially a station per year throughout that time frame, and really being able to, in a sustainable way, move forward with building out stations and then being able to staff those stations going forward, because remember, none of the operating costs are included in the bond program costs. But I do want to ask Chief Walker to speak a little bit more to the positions that we're going to be adding and just briefly what we expect that to do to our response times, which may allow for this committee to have some comfort in where the city manager's recommendation has fallen.
Thank you, Assistant Manager Bays. Madam Chair and members of the committee, as Subcommittee Chairman Berline stated, we certainly have needs in the fire department. We are aware of those needs, and we have been making those needs known for many, many years, working with the City Manager's Office to address this really in a multifaceted approach, because not one solution will solve this problem. These 4 stations will have an impact on response and service delivery to our community, and with the conversations with the City Manager's Office on what the future will hold with future bond programs, we have put together a very comprehensive plan that over the next 2 decades will bring on over 14 new fire stations, over 600 full-time employees, and over 33 fire apparatus that ultimately will help us to address the overall issue. While certainly not in the timeline we would like it to be, we know it takes time to build stations, to hire and train firefighters, and to buy apparatus. So we do have a plan. As was mentioned, we will be presenting to the subcommittee on this Wednesday what this plan entails, and some of those are the plan I just outlined, but additionally what we're doing this fiscal year, we were fortunate to be able to add new positions for Fire Station 72 that were never funded. That was 15 new permanent positions. We were able to add 4 new firefighter rover positions into our system. We also just recently received 32 positions to the SAFER 2020 grant program. It is a very beneficial program to the City of Phoenix, adding new positions funded through the federal government for 3 years. Additionally, as mentioned, other asks that we're going to ask to the subcommittee for approval is to add the 27 current 2019 SAFER positions, move those into the general fund, and include that funding into our fire department's budget moving forward. That minimizes or really eliminates the need to have to absorb those positions into our budget's new revenue. We're also asking the subcommittee to approve the funding for Fire Station 62, which is located in the Estrella Village community. It's at 93rd Avenue, Lower Buckeye, that is in the process of being constructed outside of this GEO bond program. That station, as an engine and a rescue, will go in service. We'll be asking to be able to bring those positions on early to give us additional staffing so we can put units in service more quickly to address the needs. Additionally, we're asking for a new full-time ambulance, or what we call rescue, in the system at the aviation or at Sky Harbor. That would be 7 new positions. And so with these positions, along with the 27 we'll be absorbing into our budget, the new positions bringing on early for Fire Station 62, and the new rescue, we'll be able to bring on 109 new positions within the fire department in about a 12-month period. Certainly, we'll have an impact. We also have, as I said, a multifaceted plan we're presenting to the subcommittee to move on to the council, and it addresses really a prioritization plan that will allow us to, as funds become available, we can have real-time impacts, because we have a plan for really what we would call shovel-ready projects, and where we can put positions in service as quickly as possible to start having impact. So while we appreciate the overall need, we do have a plan to make an impact, along with many other innovative and technology-based solutions we're trying to include into our system. We're really trying to address this with increasing capacity, while we also reduce the demand for fire department services and really get those two diverging trend lines to come more in alignment. So those are just some of the things we're currently doing to have an impact on service delivery.
Thank you. Other reports from staff? I think we're all set then. I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Chairman. Public safety. Did you want to make a motion at this point?
No, I don't. I had a little conversation with the city manager, and I think we need to have more conversation before. I think I've made my point. I think it's very clear, and that's the marching order I've got from our committee. We came with 10 projects which we identified needed to be done within the next 5 years, with an understanding that there's most likely not going to be room for them all, and most likely there would be a line cut at, I believe at the project number 6 line was it. So I think it would be wise if we just left it open. We have still a little more flexibility, and my vice chair will be here to represent the committee next week. I will not be in attendance.
So what you're suggesting is not making a motion today to give us the priorities that work within the allocation of the GO bond? I think that's what we would be looking for, with the idea of flexibility and discussion as we meet after every subcommittee has put their motion and approval on the table.
So, Chairwoman, if I would just clarify for the subcommittee chair, Mr. Berline, the projects that were funded within the target of 132 for public safety would be through Project 5. Project 6 sits outside of that. That would get Fire Station 7, Fire Station 13, Fire Station 15, Fire Station 51, which is the 5th project. Sandwiched in between those is Project 4, which is the Cactus Park Precinct, which totals $49 million. That $132 million reflects an ongoing O&M cost at today's cost of about $20 million, just for clarity.
Thank you for that clarification.
I have a question for the city manager, Barton. So a motion to accept 1 through 5, does that, is that premature for you right now, sir?
Chairman Berline, I wouldn't necessarily that it's premature. I think as we've had these conversations with the rest of our group, I did have a conversation with PD last week with Lori and the PD management. There may be an opportunity to scale the police precinct project and still make it work, especially knowing that that station was intentionally built not just for today, but also for the future. And given where we currently stand with police staffing, it may be possible to do that project in phases. You do a part of it in the first bond program, and you finish it out in the second bond program. But I would let Lori and Chief Kurtenbach speak more to that.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Lori.
Subcommittee Chair Berline, what we could do if there was a need to scale back the public safety bond amount further is we could scale back the Cactus Park Precinct and Northern Command Center project recommendation to focus mostly on the Cactus Park Precinct and potentially purchase land large enough to eventually house the Northern Command Center there in a future bond project, but to ultimately focus on the Cactus Park Precinct, which could allow for approximately $12.5 million worth of a reduction to the total amount recommended in projects 1 through 5. If that was not enough, there is also the option to focus solely on the Cactus Park Precinct and purchase a smaller piece of land and then build the precinct on that piece of land, which would not allow for a future accommodation of the Northern Command Center. There may be some additional options we could explore, but there are a couple options there that would allow the committee flexibility between $12.5 and $19.5 million worth of savings to the recommended project proposal amounts.
And from my perspective, I would probably, given where land is today and given our inability to acquire land that is contiguous, I would probably say that we're better suited if we were going to do anything. It would be to at least purchase the land for North and just have about $12.5 million worth of savings within this initiative.
That would be our preference as well.
So here's my thought. So if we were, because I do want to move this forward, we need to keep this train moving. And if projects 1 through 5 represent 27%, and you can do something creative with project number 4. I think if that 27% for public safety from this GO bond were to be reduced anymore, my committee would want to have a say in that. So I'm ready to accept a motion to move forward with prioritizing projects 1 through 5 with in the first phase of this GO bond program.
Madam Chair, so moved. 1 through 5 with the understanding that the Cactus Park Precinct can be scaled to the degree necessary, and if in the future there are additional projects that need to be dovetailed into the program, that the executive committee or council consider that. Are you okay with that motion? Staff, I'm looking at you all. Is there clarity on that?
Yes, Member Martin, Madam Chair. So what I'm hearing is that you want included in the motion the option if later in the committee deliberation process additional capacity were to be needed for possibly another subcommittee program area, that option would be to reduce the scope of the Cactus Park Precinct project to provide extra capacity.
That's correct.
And the only thing that I would add is just for consideration, because again, I'm big on the impact that these projects are going to have on our operating budget. The project that we're talking about scaling has 0 operating costs. So if we free up 12.5 or 19.5, whatever it is, my only ask to this body would be that whatever you add that money to, also not have any operating costs.
Madam Chair, for the sake of discussion, I don't know if the motion has been seconded. I wasn't sure if Steve made a motion and then you made a motion, or where we're at.
Steve said he'd entertain a motion, and so
You made it. So
I took him up on it.
I'll second your motion for the purpose of moving this along, and I do have just a couple of questions. I guess one is for the chair. So where are you trying to get, if that project were scaled and all that money were retained in public safety, which I heard was maybe up to $12.5 million, are you recommending that be deployed differently than the rankings that are here, which is the next item is the property warehouse renovation.
I would definitely defer to the police department, and because if I recall the conversation about that piece of property, there are ramifications if police property isn't managed correctly, and we heard some stories about this piece of property where it is absolutely justified. You see property management warehouse, it doesn't sound like it will provide a whole lot, but just the fact that it is at number 6 for the police department tells you what kind of condition that warehouse is in and how badly it is needed. We saw, when you go down to number 8, the Marriottville precinct, we saw pictures of the men and women who work at that precinct had manually hung ductwork to get cool air back to part of the building where they don't have ductwork. And I mean, these aren't wants that the police department and the fire department have. They are absolute needs. That's why I'm so passionate about this. And you know, we struggled with the 27%, and the idea that it will fall under, you know, even less. It's hard to swallow. It really is. That being said, absolute all due respect to our city manager and the work he's doing, and you know, the work that we all need to do to get where we need to get the city. Because after we're done, we have to get this thing passed. It still goes to the voters, so we still have a lot of work to do.
Great, thank you. And just a couple other questions or comments. So, first of all, I really like the fact, looking at the map, that these projects are spread out across the city and will help, I think, people in some of the more suburban parts of the city really see the value in the bond program. And so that is very, very helpful. This is obviously a very operating cost heavy bond package with $18 to $20 million worth of costs. And so I do concur with what the city manager just said, which is if we're going to shuffle some more within this program at a future meeting, we need to be super mindful of the operating cost side of thing. And again, I also, with respect to the committee work, since there's not like alternative money showing up for one of their rankings, again, I want to follow the rankings as much as possible as well as we get to a final answer. But I think for today, approving the motion as it was stated and then waiting until we get the additional information from the staff would be helpful. And the last thing I have, and you probably have this in your notes, how much money from development impact fees is associated with new fire station 51? I don't know if any others that are in this motion are eligible for impact fees, but I'm just trying to understand how much development is paying for that station.
So Chairwoman Harper, and members of the subcommittee, I'll let staff answer that, but one thing I will say is any project within this bond program, parks through public safety, that are eligible for impact fees have had those applied to the cost of the project. So I just want to be clear that that's already been accounted for. But if you want a specific amount for this project, I'll defer to staff.
I'm really pointing out that it has leverage. That's my point here. But
Madam Chair, committee members, Fire Station 51 assumes $5 million in federal funding and $1 million in available impact fee funding.
A question. So
and there are no others above that have impact fee, right?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. That's all my questions.
Okay.
So, excuse
Thank
me.
you.
So we're talking about with item number 4, if we scale it, we can reduce that from 49.5 to 37.5 million. We can capture 12 million there.
That's correct.
So if that's correct, wouldn't we just reapply if we're trying to retain those funds inside of public safety? Wouldn't we apply those to items 6 and 8, which equal 12 million? So it seems like we...
More than happy to amend my motion.
Okay.
Madam Chair, just a matter of clarification that the motion now is to the point that was made regarding item number 6 and item number 8, that any savings acquired from the Cactus Park precinct be absorbed by prioritizing number 6 and number 8.
Thank you. Other comments? I'm going to call for the vote.
Madam Chair, I don't know.
Can I just ask clarification? I'm reading the...
I'll second it.
Madam Chair, members of the committee,
Wait, the motion reread, please.
Yes, Jennifer, we hear you. Can we restate the motion so staff can reflect it appropriately on the screen, and then you can take action?
More than happy to.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, I move that items 1 through 5 be adopted by the Executive Committee with the understanding that the Cactus Park Precinct, the Northern Command Center relocation, which is scalable, and according to staff, it is scalable to the extent of an additional or less $12 million, of which that scalability be applied to item number 6 and item number 8.
So to confirm, that's what you're actually making the motion to reduce the scope of the Cactus Park precinct and reallocate that funding to the additional projects you just mentioned. Correct? Just to
Madam Chair,
clarify.
members of the committee, I'm basing the motion on the information that was given to me as it relates to the scalability. If the police department does not feel that we should scale, then it would be nice to hear that. That's fine. And then I would have to amend my motion because my motion would be 1 through 5. I'm only making the motion based on the information that I received
We
from
just want to
staff.
make it sure it's clear because
Okay.
we will reflect that on the screen for the committee to take action.
Okay, that
I
is
think
my motion.
If we do that, I think the screen needs to reflect item number 4 at $37.5 million, not at $49.5.
Madam Chair, while they're doing the math, can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
Chief,
That's
what do
what I
you
was
think
gonna
about all that?
So, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, with the motion as was just presented, I'm very comfortable with that. I feel that the Cactus Park project is scalable NCS in the future that would allow us to address the needs of property management, as Subcommittee Chair Berline addressed, and Maryville Precinct. That would be very helpful for the police department.
Madam Chair, to that point, I just want to make sure that the scalability doesn't come at the cost of the property, that we acquire the property necessary to expand in the future.
Madam Chair, Member Martin, the $37.5 million does include enough property to, in the future, build the updated Northern Command Center.
Thank you.
Thank you. So with that clarification, the motion and a second, I'm going to call for the vote. Those in favor, please let it be known by saying aye.
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 Opposed? The motion carries. Thank you all very much for your work and time to appreciate the additional funds that are coming in to really make a difference in some of these areas over and above the bonds. With that, I'd like to now turn this to Subcommittee Chairman Wilcox and the Parks and Recreation Committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got a statement, and then I'm going to make a motion. In doing so, first of all, I want to continue to thank staff, Cynthia Aguilar, Ingrid, and many of the staff members who helped our committee come to some decisions. And one of the overlying decisions that we were looking at was equity. In looking at our recommendations, as a former Phoenix City Council member, I recognize that we have made some hard decisions to accomplish what we have been tasked with as executive committee. Parks play such a vital role in our community. We heard that over and over, especially from the Estrella Park supporters. They play such a vital role in Phoenix as one of the largest park systems in the county, which we're very proud of, in the country, which we're very proud of. We have 185 parks, and over 200 miles of trails in mountain parks and preserves, which makes our park system so unique and loved by everyone. There are so many needs to help us continue to provide the best parks and programs for our residents. The Parks Subcommittee really work hard to move forward projects that will be the greatest need. Like many of you, I see the value in each of these projects, those funded and those not funded. I understand that to have a successful bond program, we really need to have something for people throughout the entire city, not only to make sure that they know that their vote will count, but also to see and to really benefit from the parks and park facilities that will go up. Naturally, we are hopeful that we would be allocated more bond funds to address this, but now knowing where we have to draw the line, I am concerned that there's not equitable distribution throughout the city. Because of that, I would like to make the following recommendations, and if staff, as I make them, could change the recommendation so that we can vote on it, I'd appreciate that. I would like to move the Grant Park Boathouse renovation to the bottom of the list, drop Mayor T. Hance Park improvements to number 10, and move up Estrella Civic Center space, Desert View Civic space, Telephone Pioneers of American Recreation Center improvements, Mountain View Community Center Park Sports Complex improvements. I don't do this lightly. I do it with looking at equality for all and equity for all in our big parks and recreation system. So these changes will help us better distribute projects throughout the city. So with that, I'd like to make that a motion.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second.
Thank you. So with that, I'd like to open the floor for discussion with members of the committee, and you can call on staff if you would like as well.
Madam Chair, I guess one, if we could wait to see the changes made on screen, I think it'd be helpful for us. And I do have a question. I think I need to disclose that I am on the private sector fundraising committee for Margaret T. Hance Park, and I'm the lead fundraiser from the private sector. So does that mean that I need to excuse myself from conversation and or voting?
Yes.
Madam Chair, if you can, the committee just can give us a minute so that staff can make the changes on the screen before the committee would take action. In the meantime, if you wanted to answer or ask questions of staff, you could do so.
And I believe, without breaking my own cardinal rule of doing public math, I believe that what you've recommended totals $68.5 million, which is about $4 million over our current target. But that's okay because you guys adopted the targets with flexibility. We just have to figure out how we're going to close that gap. But I do concur with your assessment that we do need coverage with parks across the entirety of the city.
Other comments from members of the committee?
I guess my concern is that again, like I said with the streets department, the committee rated things based upon the input they received at the time. And so I'm concerned about reordering the input, different from what we just did with housing because there was another funding source, or different than what we did with police because there was scalability there. So I guess I do believe that everything should be well spread out across the city. But we haven't talked about the scalability of some projects, and instead you're reordering the priorities pretty substantially from what the committee recommended. And I guess I would just need to understand that a little bit better. I'll stop there and just try to understand it, because I'm looking at the map, and there are some. The place that has the least amount in the funding without reordering is the far north, and I see that you've put those projects in. We did hear a lot, as did your committee, from the Estrella folks, and I do think it's a valuable project to try to find funding for. I'm just not sure that the way to do that is to simply swap out the rankings that the subcommittee did.
Rick, let me
So-
address that.
And,
When
and then
we first
finally,
came-
let me say one last thing, which is that Hance Park, while it is a centralized location in the city, it is not if you, I happen to live near there, so I happen to know, but there were thousands of people in Hance Park this weekend from all over the entire city. It is the one park that really serves the entire city. So to think of it, yes, does it serve a neighborhood? Yes, it does. But to think of it as geographically not of interest, I guess, to the rest of the city, I would say it serves everyone. I will also say, because I think it's important to say publicly, I sit as a volunteer on the Hance Park Conservancy Board, so I'm very familiar with the park. Unlike Devney, I don't believe that constitutes any sort of conflict because it's not part of my job. I'm just a volunteer.
Yeah, there's no conflict.
So thank you. But I did want to disclose it anyway because I just happen to know a lot about that park. And I think scaling it might be an option. I don't know enough about that. But to simply, rank it low, just flip-flopping things because we heard recently from some people about one area or the other, that concerns me about in the process, which is why I was so focused on rankings.
Thank you very much, Subcommittee
Let me
Chairman.
address that. Rick, when we originally came back with our scoring, Estrella was higher up and it was funded. During the course of the conversation in our committee, we talked a lot about equity and we started switching things to kind of accommodate that. I didn't think we did it enough, and the committee very clearly said, if there's more money, we need equity. So I feel comfortable with the decision that we're making, and I did rank Mayor Hance number 10 so that we could, if we got any money, raise the issue, and I would hope that we could put some of the money back in. That would be my priority for that. I do think that Mayor Hance Park has gotten a lot of money over the course of the last few years, particularly for the Super Bowl improvements. And I think in fairness to the rest of the city, and listening to what the committee said about equity, and the fact that Estrella had been ranked in the surveys higher, what my recommendations are justified. I sincerely feel that there will be money for Mayor Hance Park improvements, and I'm hoping that we'll look at alternative funding for that. There will be some infrastructure monies coming into the city in the future. Perhaps we could look there. But if there are any monies on the bottom line, my priorities would be giving a little bit to Mayor Hance Park to start it, and also to the Parsons Center. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Subcommittee Chairman Martin.
Madam Chair, I just would like to address the issue that Mr. Namor continues to bring up as far as prioritization is concerned. And while I'm grateful for all the hard work that the subcommittees have put into that process, unfortunately the conditions changed. And I'm not privy to be able to go back to our subcommittee and ask under the different conditions whether or not those priorities would have changed, because I believe they would have. I don't know that, but I believe from our committee's perspective they would have. So while I agree with Mr. Naymark as it relates to the issue of prioritization, I also trust and believe in our subcommittee chairs that they have the intuition to reconfigure based on the changed condition. So I'm comfortable with that, Madam Chair.
Thank you for that. Other comments from Subcommittee Chairman? Yes, please.
I appreciate Subcommittee Member Wilcox's knowledge of the conversations that went on in that subcommittee with reference to the various ordering of the projects, the prioritization, and the changes to that we are currently making given the constraints of the budget. I think a focus on equity, I really appreciate that focus, because we all know that there have been historic inequities in our investments in our cities, certain areas of our cities. And so I think as citizens on this subcommittee, on this executive committee now, we have the power to address these inequities. And I just wanted to make the comment that I appreciate Subcommittee Chair Wilcox's.
Thank you. Other comments?
Madam and Subcommittee Chair Wilcox, I just want to say I'm an echo chamber at this point from both the comments. But I do think that in part we have heard a lot of different comments. We have read through the budget. I know that we've read it multiple times, and I absolutely trust the subcommittee chair to make this decision. And I agree that equity has to be one of the things that we look at most. It's obvious this area of Australia has been neglected for decades, and I think it's important to move it up, and I think that we have the power to do that. And I'm happy with the reorganization that was proposed.
Thank you. Vice Chairman?
Yes, can I ask, is it possible, as we look at the Desert View Civic Space, is it possible to achieve the objective there by dropping that cost down to about $7.5 million and fitting that in so that it can fit into the entire budget? Otherwise, it looks like we've got about a $7.5 million surplus based on what I'm seeing here.
Chairwoman Harper, members of the subcommittee, committee member Reed, I believe right now, as the motion was stated, as you can see on the screen, we are at about 68.5 or 68.4. I round up still. And the target for parks was $64 million. So you're about $4.4 million over what the initial targets with flexibility that you adopted.
I might be looking at something different, but when I'm looking at trying to fit into it, we're at about $56,654 in terms of what would get paid. Am I not looking at the same thing?
Committee Member Reed, Chairman, members of the committee, from how we understood the motion was to advance projects 1 through 9, as you see them on the screen. That totals $68.4 million. The city manager's target was $64 million. So you see the deficit of roughly $4.4 million on the screen is what would have to be identified from another program area to accommodate projects 1 through 9. If the committee wanted to reach the city manager's target, then as you would be looking, roughly through project 6.
Yeah, I think the thing that's throwing committee member Reed off is just the highlighting. So I've asked them to turn off the highlighting so you can clearly see what the motion was and where the line gets drawn relative to the targets.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
So, Madam Chair, I do have another question, maybe for the subcommittee chair.
Thank you.
I don't disagree with the desire and the need to fund the Estrella Civic Space. It does come with an operating cost, which Hance did not. So that's an issue. But I guess my question is, why can't we seek other infrastructure for the South Mountain Roadway as an example? It's a road. It's not even a park space. So I'd rather, consider dropping that as opposed to dropping Hance, which is an actual park that's going to get improvements. I mean, it is a park road, I get that, but there's a lot of federal infrastructure money coming down for roads. And so I just throw it out as an example of, I just don't know why you picked that to move so far down as compared to some of the other projects. Your mic's not on.
We did take money out of that. We already reduced it to try to fit in more projects.
Yeah, and I guess I would add to that, Chairwoman Harper and Member Neymark, you are not mistaken about having the ability to possibly get infrastructure money, but that's a possibility. It's not a known fact or a known statement. And that road, I'll have to let Inger and Cynthia talk about it. That road has been deteriorating for years, and South Mountain is one of our heaviest used parks. And we were just up there the other day. We opened up the South Mountain Environmental Center again, so we anticipate that folks will be using that. It's coming up on its 100th year, and so I'll let those two speak to that.
Sure, Madam Chair, members of the bond committee, that is correct. So South Mountain Park sees over 2.5 million visitors a year. So that's either people hiking, driving, bicycling, participating in events in the mountain. It's reaching its 100-year mark in 2024. It is heavily used. This project is one that was reduced. The subcommittee did look at the scalability of projects previously, and this is one that we cut $4.9 million out of. So the original proposal was to complete, there's actually 15 miles of roadway improvements that are needed. And we say deteriorating, obviously those are safety concerns, whether it's cars, whether it's bicyclists, depending on, the type of user, it's creating unsafe conditions for everyone. So what we did there is we took a reduction to complete about half of those roadway improvements by scaling this project back.
Thank you. Vice Chairman.
Thank you. I do want to just reiterate again, thank you to our subcommittee chair, the Honorable Mary Rose Wilcox. I don't think anyone in here is saying that Hans Park isn't valuable, and there were a lot of people there this weekend. There's already a beautiful project happening there right now. It's still under construction, a beautiful walkway, and I think we're going to continue to do those enhancements. But I just want to commend you for putting the Estrella. They have a piece of dirt. They have nothing there, and I just think that is, very. I just want to thank you and your subcommittee for allowing us to make that change as well. So thank you so much.
On the $4 million extra, I would ask staff at the next meeting, I would like to pass this motion, but ask staff if there's any scaling down of any of the projects that would give us that $4 million. I think we've scrubbed them as much as we could, but we could have the possibility of perhaps in number 7, as recommended by one of our executive committee members, looking at that, looking at the roads one more time, see if there's anything in the street budget that we could use, to help that. And I would like to move ahead with the motion with the caveat that next week we would see if there's any scaling down that could add the $4 million.
I think another way to consider this is for you to make the motion consistent with the city manager's recommendation with the additional language. That is what other committee member chairmen have done, so that you will be in sync with the other committees in terms of the amount that we will be voting on would be what is recommended by the city manager. And then as others have done, that additional $4 million, is there a way to deal with that with some change within?
All right, I really want to reflect the equity, though, and with that, the 3 that are added after Mayor Hance reflect that equity. So I would, go ahead and put my motion forward, and within that motion, I think it fits within what we're trying to do, and, the caveat would be that we would look at scaling down. I hate to reduce the motion because then that affects the equity, which was the whole point of the motion. Let me ask the city manager if he has any recommendation.
So, Chairwoman Harper, members of the subcommittee, committee member Wilcox, I asked Cynthia and Inger if we want to keep this consistent with what, to Chairwoman's point, with the other groups, do you foresee that there are maybe 3 or 4 projects in there that we can shave off $1 million each to get to the 68.5 and make the reservation that if additional funding comes available somewhere else, that money go back into those projects?
Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, City Manager Barton, we shaved off money off of 3 projects already, and so it'd be very difficult. Estrella and Desert View are phase 1 of 2 phases, right? So it's already only going to be partial of a park. The libraries will go into those 2 locations, and if you just have a library sitting in the dirt lot with not the park piece, I think there's an opportunity there to really make it a smaller complex to begin with, and then when the phase 2 comes, But if you have a library just sitting out there in the middle of a dirt lot, I think it's a little bit maybe disingenuous to the community, especially knowing that it may take another 5 years to get those other pieces in. So
Let me phrase it this way then. So to Rick's point, and again, knowing how important South Mountain is, knowing that this is a 5-year plan, and if that project were moved to, say, the 5th year of that plan, the 4th or 5th year of that plan, and you take off $4.5 million out of that project and know that the second bond program is going to come in 28, is there a way to do it that way so that you straddle it over 2 bond programs?
Madam Chair, members of the Executive Committee, again, we'd already taken almost $5 million out of that. So
I'm not asking to cut it. I'm just saying, can we phase it over the course of 2 projects?
Certainly could, and I think we would focus on the areas where the bikers have the most tenuous circumstances, which is the edge, because again, it's a road that's shared by vehicles, bicyclists. A lot of bicyclists go up to the top, and so it could be scalable and would focus at that point on the areas that were most in need.
Madam Chair, to that point, I'm assuming every project can be done that way, right? I mean, obviously there's priorities, right, that we need to move up in advance into the first year, right? But I'm assuming that a number of these projects can have that sort of movement in the back end of the 5-year term. So, you know, on the one hand, while I'm comfortable having that conversation, I'm a little bit uncomfortable that a project that is of this importance is sort of the focal point. My point to you is any of these projects can be the focal point in that line of where we place it in the bond program. And I don't know, I feel pretty strongly about the roadway safety of South Mountain. It's one of our gems here in the valley. So I think I made my point.
Other comments?
Madam Chair, just a question for Mary Rose. I'm a little confused as to what we're trying to achieve. Are you trying to get Sweetwater and South Phoenix Youth Center in, or are you just trying to get to the 68?
I'm trying to get to the 68.
Oh, I see. The
That's what I'm
target
trying to do.
64.
You still need $4 million.
Thank you. I just didn't understand the math. Okay.
Vice Chairman Bruce.
Madam Chair, I do have one non-Hans Park related question, if I may participate in the conversation.
You actually cannot participate at all.
Okay, not even a clarification question?
A clarification question is permitted.
I was just wondering why the move of Grant Park Historic Bathhouse renovation down from where it was originally prioritized to the very bottom. If we're talking about equity and knowing that space in Central City South, I was just looking for clarification on that.
Sure, Madam Chair, Committee Member Price, I would say that really in terms of equity and why that was moved down, and Chairwoman Wilcox can add to this if she would like, there's already a project that is impacting Grant Park in this proposal, which is also where the bathhouse is located. So project number 4, which is upgrading Harmon Pool to a regional pool, that whole concept also includes converting 3 existing, much smaller, underutilized pools into neighborhood splash pads, and one of those is at Grant Park.
Thank you, Cynthia. That answered it. Well, why don't I make the motion to do 1 through 9 as moving forward. Again, asking that we look at 4, but hoping that there's enough flexibility with projects throughout the other bonds that we can accommodate it. I hate to drop any of these because that would drop the equity issue. So I think that's a motion. It's on the table. Perhaps we could just vote on it.
The motion being $4 million over what has been allocated.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think I'd be more comfortable making the motion 1 through 9 with the scalability that Dave shared to make it to that, because if we move to go over, we're going to start back with where we're going to take it from the other subcommittees, and so I would be uncomfortable with that. I'd be more comfortable with the motion with the 1 through 9, with us using the scalability, whichever one that would equal the amount of 64. Are you?
That would be fine. We'll ask staff to look and see if there's anything else, and if there's anything alternative funding that we can look at. Okay.
Do we have a second to that modification?
Second.
Thank you. Other discussion then? Those in favor, please let it be known by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. So moved. Aye. Thank you.
Aye. Thank you, everybody. This was very hard.
So moved. Thank you all very much for these difficult discussions. We're now going to move to the public comment period of the agenda, and I will first ask the city attorney to explain the rule of public comment to the Go Bond Committee meetings.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the public may speak.
Sorry, I'm sorry to interrupt. Madam Chair, do you want to consider doing potentially environment and sustainability today? I believe there's enough time remaining on the schedule to accommodate that and still do public comment.
Well, I think that would be great. Thank you for that recommendation. So we'll come back to you, Mr. City Attorney, and we'll move to the environment and sustainability and ask Ginger Torres, chairman of that subcommittee, to please begin.
Good morning, everybody. Start while our staff is taking their places. We are all caught off a little off guard here, so bear with us. So I want to start with a little background. Our subcommittee was one of the only subcommittees that actually came in with a budget that was comparable to what the city manager and the executive committee asked of the subcommittee. However, the subcommittee felt very strongly that that budget was woefully inadequate to address the environmental issues that our city is facing today. The environment affects every single person on this executive committee, every person in this room today, and every single person in our city. Human health and the health of our environment are directly intertwined. Investment in our environment and sustainability in our city is not only beneficial for public health and well-being, but it also makes good economic sense. Businesses are opening their eyes to the long-term effects of climate change, and they are looking to invest in sustainable cities. To retain long-term business attractiveness, it is imperative for our city to prioritize the health and sustainability of our environment. Our mayor and city council have taken significant steps to demonstrate the city's commitment to environmental leadership through the general plan, the climate action plan, joining C40 cities, forming the first publicly funded heat office in the country, which I am proud to say that I was a part of advocating for, and many other steps such as this. We must assure that the goals in these plans and these efforts are met through allocating the proper funding to support programs and projects that will achieve the goals set out by our city council and mayor's office. It is imperative that our city invest in more environmental and sustainability projects now. The crisis is now, and the time to address this issue is today. It cannot be put off to the next bond cycle, which may be another 16 years given the history of the bond cycles in the city so far. We must ensure that we have clean air, clean water, and spaces free from environmental contamination. Our climate is an opportunity now to prepare for increased impacts that scientists anticipate are in our future, especially extreme heat. Climate change and extreme heat will affect all Arizonans. It will likely disproportionately impact communities already facing inequities. Inequities is something that we've talked about on this executive committee. We just talked about it in the parks discussion, and it is something that is critical to the environmental and sustainability discussion. This committee has proposed investments that will save the city money over time with an added benefit that they would have low operating costs and should result in improvements to the city budget. The proposed energy efficiency projects, renewable energy, and transition to electric vehicles will help reduce energy consumption and reduce our city's GHG emissions. At the request of the executive committee, like I said before, our committee prioritized and was able to do the difficult work ahead of time to return a recommendation to the executive committee that was under the $26 million budget that was allocated to us initially. However, our committee unanimously supported funding at a higher level. The environmental allocation in the GO bond budget is only 5% of the total GO bond. 5% is not adequate to achieve the environmental and sustainability priorities and goals of the city today. I, with the recommendation of the Environment and Sustainability Subcommittee behind this recommendation, request the Executive Committee consider increasing the environmental budget allocation overall. We are a desert city. Putting 5% of the bond to environmental and sustainability issues does not seem in line with prioritization of the public in this area. We've heard substantial public comment on this area. Allocating an additional $15 million to achieve the subcommittee's recommendation of $41 million would be transformative to the environmental budget and make our city more resilient. Many of the environmental projects are scalable, and the Environmental Committee has provided recommended amounts to increase funding to the projects already proposed. Again, I just want to remind everybody, environmental issues, climate issues are a now problem. They are not a future problem. We are in the midst of dealing with this crisis now, and I hope that this executive committee can find some funds to allocate additional resources to this area. Thank you.
Does staff have a report?
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the Executive Committee, and our Subcommittee Chair, Torres. We don't have a report per se, but I do want to express staff's strong appreciation for the work that the subcommittee did and the creativity that they deployed to combine some of the prioritized needs into these categories. So I just want to recognize that. I also would want the Executive Committee to be aware that when it comes to programs such as our trees and heat, particularly, we do have ongoing operating funds devoted to those projects, as well as significant dollars from the ARPA allocation to the city. So just wanted that to be out there for the Executive Committee to consider. But again, want to thank the subcommittee. We worked hard to come in at our number, but recognizing the chair's comments, I know that the subcommittee felt that more was warranted.
Thank you. Other comments from committee members?
Chairwoman Harper, if I may, just for clarity, I was just looking at the ARPA website because Subcommittee members Torres mentioned additional funding for specific things, and I want to just point out, since I've been responsible for ARPA the last couple of years, we do have $5 million of our ARPA budget going specifically to trees, $3 million for home weatherization to assist with some of those homes in our underserved areas with weatherization projects, and another $2.9 million for shade structures. So again, in total, that's about another $11 million that's not reflected in our bond program, but I did want the subcommittee to know that it's out there.
Subcommittee did request staff go through and through other methods of funding. It was a recurring request that we had of staff, and that was all factored into the recommendations that did come out of the subcommittee.
Thank you. Other comments?
Madam Chair?
Yes.
We're going to be dealing with the issues of climate change as time kind of goes on into the future. Just wondering if the federal government will, I'm sure, participating in this as we move forward with the the issues of, hurricanes, tornadoes, storms, heat waves, as it increases all throughout this country, throughout the world. So, and I would imagine that other countries and governments will be dealing with this on a grander scale. It's not a question, but maybe in the next 2 years, the next 5 years, there will be more funding available for those issues as our city moves forward.
It is my hope that there would be more funding, but I would not want to place the future of our city in the whim of the hands of politics at the federal level. And so I think that we should make investments in our city on what makes sense today and what we have control over.
Well, I will share my thoughts. Like the other subcommittees, everyone wanted to increase their allocation over and above the city manager's recommendation. And I think there will be a time to have these discussions. But I think at this point, I would have a problem voting in support at this meeting to increase the percentage.
And that's fine. I figured I would use the time because it was allocated to us, and we had already come in at budget, so there wasn't a lot of discussion for whittling down budgets in this conversation.
Yes, Chairman.
I wanted to make an additional comment about that. I'm hoping that as we go forward and there's new funds available, that all of our projects that had priorities that aren't going to be funded get looked at as priority to be moved forward first in all of our subcommittees.
Thank you. Yes.
A comment also. I do think your words are very well taken. Climate is something we all have to pay attention to, particularly in this area. And we've seen it over and over as the heat gets hotter and hotter for us in the summertime. So thank you for your thoughtful discussion, and hopefully there will be enough money to reach your level.
Other comments?
I had a question, Madam Chair. Is the number I'm looking at, it looks as if there's 900,000 additional money. They're actually under budget as proposed. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I believe we were under budget. I would leave it to city staff to reallocate that 900,000 into one of these projects, but all of our projects were scalable. And so happy to put that back in. Although we are looking for another $15 million in addition.
I know.
Yes.
Madam Chair, just a quick comment. I also think, none of these projects have a location yet, but I think when you look at these projects, they are going to extremely beneficial to particularly to underserved areas of the community where there isn't a lot of landscaping, isn't a lot of shade. And also a lot of the brownfields projects tend to be in areas of the community that were, by definition of brownfield, they were used for industrial purposes or whatever. There's pollution, there's issues of reclaiming these for the community. So I'm really, this is a little bit of a new area, some of these, for city bond projects, and I'm really glad that there's this much available to apply to those, because I think, I just think it's transformative for the community to be able to address these issues head on in a very strong way. And I do agree, if there was more money, it'd be great if we could do even more. But the impact here on communities that have borne the brunt of environmental contamination and or lack of trees and shade and that kind of thing is just tremendous. So thank you.
Thank you. Other comments?
Madam Chair, to be more direct, is there a way to add the 900,000 back into other projects to expand? That I guess would be a question for staff.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Member Grandal. Yes, of course, the 900,000 that is not allocated in the recommended numbers from the subcommittee could be allocated to the projects in priority. And to that extent, we could increase the 13.5 for the first priority to 14. And the second category of heat resiliency could be increased to 7.8, and that would round out our 26 million in the priority that the subcommittee recommended. Just a thought, just a suggestion, but I'm curious whether our subcommittee chair has another idea.
I like that suggestion.
Would we be ready for a motion to come to the floor?
I would make the motion
Jenny
and to adjust accordingly to staff's recommendation.
Member Torres, Madam Chair, what we would be looking for is a motion so that to direct staff, and possibly you could make that motion, Member Torres, to adjust projects 1 and 2 to equal the city manager's target.
I'll make that motion.
Do we have a second?
Second.
I'll second.
Any questions, other comments?
Madam Chair.
Yes.
We're, based on the previous action of the executive committee, we're $4.4 million over already. So assuming that nothing's scaled on the parks, right? Would it be more appropriate to hold on this until we get an aggregate number that we're going to be working with in the future instead of adding on to the current?
Are you talking about the additional $900,000
Yes,
that was
that's what I'm talking
allocated?
about. I'm not besmirching it in any way, shape, or form. I'm just saying maybe a more prudent approach would be to just hold on that, know that it's potentially available, look at the 4.4 that we're currently over, see how much of that has become scalable, and sort of save that for down the road. That's my thought. I mean,
the committee is recommending that we increase $15 million. I don't think there's an additional, whether or not it was allocated. I don't know why this wasn't allocated in the last round. I think it belongs in the environmental budget.
Just to be clear, the motion that you have put on the floor would be for the amount the city manager has allocated, which includes the additional 900 in your...
That's my motion. With the, and if staff would clarify it, where we accounted for that additional 900,000.
Yes, absolutely. Member Berline, Madam Chair, members of the committee. So I believe it's reflected on the screen what the motion did to projects 1 and 2 to take that $900,000 difference and allocate it to project 1, which would increase it to 14 million from 13.5, and increase project 2 heat resiliency to 7.7 million from 7.3 million. And just to clarify, the subcommittee's recommendations that were advanced to the executive committee did originally total just shy of that 26 million target from the city manager at 25.1 million.
That clarifies the motion. And we have a second.
Second.
Those in favor, please let it be known by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed?
Madam Chair, I abstain.
Abstain? One abstain. Thank you very much. We will now move into the public comment section, and I will go back to the city attorney for explanation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the public may speak to comment on the General Obligation Bond Program. The City Code requires speakers to present their comments in a respectful and courteous manner. Profane language, threats, or personal attacks on members of the public, council members, committee members, or staff are not allowed. A person who violates these rules will lose the opportunity to continue to speak. The committee and staff cannot discuss or comment on matters relating to pending claims or litigation.
Thank you very much. We today have 35 speakers registered, including 9 virtual participants wishing to speak. I will give each speaker 1 minute, and again, Speakers will not be allowed to pool time, and I'm asking that you only speak if your points have not been addressed by a prior speaker. We will start with the virtual participants. When your name is called, your audio device will be unmuted and you will begin your remarks. At the conclusion of the virtual speakers, we will invite the in-person people to come up to the podium. So let me turn this over to staff now to move forward.
Our first virtual speaker is Nicole Rodriguez, followed by James Teeple. Nicole, are you on the line?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, and you may proceed.
Great. Good morning. I was hoping for 3 minutes like at the last meeting, so I'll go ahead and speak very fast. Maintenance for streets is not appropriate for Muni bonds, which are intended for capital projects, if I'm not mistaken. And when the city T 2050 states it will pave all city streets, including neighborhood streets, then why do we need a pavement supplement program in this bond? This has not been explained. And Vision Zero and the equity-based mobility programs are public health and safety programs. Vision Zero can create the safest streets for all, and this can happen fast with the appropriate funding. The city manager just said federal infrastructure money is not known. The bond money is needed and is a fail-safe for the rapidly and exponentially increasing traffic fatalities and serious injuries. We are number 3 in the nation for this. And the chairman for police and fire gave a prime example why we need more funds that focus on public safety on our streets. Vision Zero has the potential to exponentially reduce fire and police calls, which we all know a large percentage of those calls are traffic related. And if anyone else wants to give up their time to me, I would love that because I have a lot more to share on facts. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Nora Ulola, followed by James Teeple. Nora, are you on the line? No, I'm sorry. There was a misunderstanding. Our next speaker is James Teeple, followed by Michael Panvini. James, are you on the line?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, you may proceed.
Yes, thank you. Thank you to the committee, and I'm speaking on behalf of the RAA, the Roosevelt Action Association, and we'd like to, we're advocating for the full tranche for Hance Park, and I'd just like to speak to the importance of infrastructure improvement, which is, part of this money, especially money that would go towards renovating the Central Avenue Bridge, which is really essential to activating the entire park. That bridge is in such bad condition and anybody that's been over there can see that. And if we can get that bridge renovated, if we can get it cleaned up underneath, we could perhaps get a farmer's market underneath there and really pull both sides of the park together in a way that hasn't been done previously. And of course, the park is, it's for the people of the entire city, as we're going to see with the Super Bowl. You're going to have tens of thousands of people coming into the park. It's going to be a central focus of the Super Bowl activities. And it's not just for the people who live around the park like myself. So thank you again for considering this to the entire committee.
Our next speaker is Michael Panvini, followed by Brenda Montoya. Michael, are you on the line? Okay, Michael's on the line. Our next speaker is Brenda Montoya, who will require Spanish translation, followed by Dan Penton. Brenda, are you on the line?
Muy buenos días. Yes. Muy buenos días.
Good morning.
Mi nombre es Brenda Montoya y pertenezco al Distrito 7. Soy miembro de Si Se Puede Neighborhood Association. He vivido en esta...
My name is Brenda Montoya. I'm from District 7, and I am a member of the Si Se Puede Neighborhood Watch.
He vivido en esta comunidad desde hace 26 años.
I've lived in this community for the last 26 years.
Y creo la importancia de contar con un parque regional en la 99 Avenida y Lower Buckeye.
And I think it's important to be able to have a regional park in the area of 99th and Lower Buckeye,
donde las personas pueden realizar actividades físicas,
where people can get together and exercise.
También tener una librería y un centro comunitario.
And also to have a library and a community center.
Esto ayudará a tener una comunidad más unida y participativa. Muchísimas gracias.
This will allow for the community to come together and interact and participate.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much.
Our next virtual speaker is Dan Penton, followed by Joseph Spector. Dan, are you on the line?
Yes, good morning. Thank you, members of the subcommittee, executive committee, and staff. My name is Dan Penton. I live in Levine. I'm co-founder of Bike Levine and also on the Levine Citizens for Responsible Development. I just want to say, hearing the conversation this morning, I'm appalled at the entitlement that is being held for enhanced park improvements. I'm very happy that Parks Chair Wilcox made her suggestions this morning, because the park is very much needed out in Estrella. Somebody mentioned having thousands of people in Hance Park this past weekend. Well, that's nice because you have a park. They can't do that in Estrella. They have no parks, little park, very few parks, if any. So I think a park that's been doing them for like over 20 years is not, is a much higher priority for talking about equity. Like City Manager Barton also said that while the Wells Fargo building for public safety was not in the GO bond, it is a significant investment for public safety. Hance Park is getting the fire station number 4, which will also be an investment. Plus, they had the event this past weekend, which raised how much money. There is no alternate funding source for Estrella Park. It needs to be put up on the priority list. And thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Our next virtual speaker is Joseph Spector, followed by Christine Morris. Joseph, are you on the line?
Yes, thank you and good morning. Chairwoman and members of the Executive Committee, I'm Joe Spector, President and General Director of Arizona Opera. In addition to the city-owned buildings that serve as the Arizona Opera Center in Central Phoenix, we are a resident company of both Symphony Hall and the Herberger Theater Center, in addition to our performance venues in Tucson. I'm speaking in support of the city's approval of the full allocation of the originally proposed bond funding toward the city-owned arts and culture facilities, which are in vital need of capital maintenance. This funding represents a minute portion of the overall GO bond program, with an outsized ROI due to the economic productivity of our sector. The city's venues have a significant need for improvements necessary to address deferred maintenance and achieve sufficient levels of accessibility and technical capacity. For instance, the need for updated assistant listening devices at Symphony Hall, or audiovisual upgrades that would allow for streaming of performances needed in modern times. These improvements are necessary to ensure that Phoenix's venues are on par with other major cities as we continue to compete in a national marketplace for economic growth, driven in part by quality of life decisions made by individuals and companies every day. Thanks for your consideration.
Our next virtual speaker is Christine Morris, followed by Jamie Kozemzak. Christine, are you on the line?
I am.
Okay, you may proceed.
Yes. Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the Executive Committee. I'm Christine Morris, Superintendent of Union Elementary School District and a member of the Estrella Village Planning Commission. I want to thank you for your engagement and deliberation over the GO Bond priorities. And I'm here this morning to thank you for your support of the Estrella Village civic space. And I thank the subcommittee chairwoman for reprioritizing and the committee for supporting that reprioritization of the investment in the Estrella Village civic space. It is an equity issue, and our homeowners are raising families and are retiring, all surrounded by warehouses, increasing number of freeways with limited access to city services, parks, libraries, or transportation. I sincerely thank you for reprioritizing and considering the needs of the promised park space for our community. It is needed, and I thank you for your support.
Our next virtual speaker is Jamie Kozemzak, followed by Sandra Oviedo. Jamie, are you on the line?
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the Executive Committee. At the last few bond meetings, I spoke to advocate for the projects included in the Arts and Culture Bond to highlight the needs to keep Symphony Hall as a world-class facility for our community. as well as to highlight the breadth of community engagement projects that all of our arts and cultural organizations provide to enhance the quality of life for those many individuals who are underserved and making art accessible to more individuals. The overall health and well-being of a world-class city requires a robust arts and culture sector to continue to attract business and talent to aid in continued economic development. Arts and culture are always the first to go and the last to recover in times of economic volatility, often viewed as dispensable, when in reality, the arts and cultural sector contributes a strong ROI by generating tax revenue, small business support that often result from our sector. I'm asking for support for the capital improvement projects to be moved up in priority so that we can address the critical repairs in our current facilities and also to upgrade and enhance the outdated systems in Symphony Hall. Thank you for your time today.
Our next virtual speaker is Sandra Oviedo, followed by Jessica Leach. Sandra, are you on the line?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, and you may proceed.
Good morning, Chairwoman and members of the Executive Committee. Though I'm a member of the Maryvale Village Planning Committee, I come before you today as a citizen of this city and a mother of two to ask you to fully fund Vision Zero and equity-based transportation mobility programs, which will make our streets safer. I often see pedestrian fatalities involving young kids. I pray every day that my family survive this dangerous streets, the Phoenix streets that claim lives every day. We cannot wait another day for our unsafe streets to take another life. Fully funding Vision Zero and equity-based transportation mobility programs is necessary for saving lives and developing our local economy. If you care about public safety and uplifting our economy, then please fully fund these programs. Thank you.
Our next virtual speaker is in Upper Council Chambers is Jessica Leach, followed by Chelsea Ryan.
Good morning. So understanding how difficult this is for everyone, I just want to reiterate a couple of points that are incredibly important for the Parsons Center. It's not just about the Southwest Center. We are the only healthcare and human services project that is part of the overall proposal. And I've heard a lot about equity today, but we're also the only agency that focuses on the LGBTQ plus community within the entire bond proposal. We offer services that individuals cannot get anywhere else. Cutting us means actually risking people's lives. We offer life care services, be it healthcare, mental care, housing support, and workforce development to a community that has been largely underserved and is still at risk for the ongoing HIV epidemic. So I ask you to reconsider and fully fund our project. Thank you.
Our next speaker in Upper Council Chambers is Chelsea Ryan, followed by Cindy Gahn.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Chelsea Ryan Wofford, and I'm the Director of Mental and Social Wellness at the Southwest Center. So you heard my Executive Director, Jessica, speak, but I'm going to be speaking towards the mental health aspect. So homelessness is on the go bond. For us to be a competitive city and ultimately state, we have to have mental health care for everyone, but especially those that are re-entering housing and re-entering situations that they have not been in before. Our current wait list at the Southwest Center just for mental health services is over 150 individuals. This is children, this is families, this is the elderly. So if we are not getting the GO bond, it is going to irreparably impact those that are seeking services from our organization. We believe that the $6.8 million investment to expand services for individuals impacted by or not at risk for HIV and AIDS and the LGBTQ community is urgent. Considering what our community has at stake, if they aren't able to access these services we provide in a timely fashion, like I said, is unimaginable. Here at the Southwest Center, we also provide comprehensive mental health support, EMDR, everything that you cannot get typically from other service providers. So please consider us for the GO bond. Thanks.
Our next speaker in Upper Council Chambers is Cindy Gahn, followed by Sandra Bassett.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the Executive Committee. My name is Cindy Gahn, and I serve as Senior Director of Phoenix Community Alliance. I speak on behalf of our Board of Directors and our nearly 300 members about a lot of things, including arts and culture funding. We are advocating for full funding for all 9 arts and culture projects regarding education, full funding for the ASU Health Tech facility, regarding
SSD subcommittee, Vision Zero and T2050 full funding, and regarding neighborhoods, all funding for historic projects, historic preservation projects. With regard to Margaret T. Hance Park, that is a public-private partnership, and without the backing of the city, it's going to be really hard to convince the private sector to also pony up the funds that need to happen for that park. It's a very unique and special park because it's built on top of a freeway, and the type of funds needed to revitalize that park are not like the funds needed to revitalize any other type of a park. So we respectfully request for these funding asks. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker in Upper Council Chambers is Sandra Bassett, followed by Ome Egelreiter.
Good morning. Sandra Bassett, CEO for the Phoenix Center for the Arts. I was very pleased today to hear the word equity being considered as you allocate your funding. I ask that you use that word when you consider the funding for the Arts and Culture Subcommittee in your meeting next week. Equity. Who needs the funding? Who serves? How is it utilized? And we already acknowledge and understand that arts and culture generally is underfunded. So I ask for full consideration of everything that is being presented from arts and culture to be able to be fully funded. But most of all, I ask that you continue to use the word that has indelible impact, and that is the word equity. Thank you so much.
Our next speaker in Upper Council Chambers is Omer Egelreiter, followed by Mirinda DiBiase. Okay, thank you. Our next speaker in Upper Council Chambers is Mirinda DiBiase, followed by Philip Wyatt. Okay. Our next speaker in Upper Council Chambers is Mark Metis, followed by Ryan Boyd.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the subcommittee. With the utmost respect for all of the projects being considered in every category, I again urge you to consider the impact of arts and culture on the quality of life for those in our community, and to consider the entire recommendation for arts and culture. A few new points here that these projects include deferred maintenance and replacement of obsolete equipment in these facilities like the Herberger Theater Center. To be clear, these are projects that are the responsibility of the city to take care of, and right now are costing the city extra operating dollars to help Band-Aid together to keep these facilities running. It is also important to note that the total funding needed for the Herberger Theater Center and the Symphony Hall projects were reduced due to alternate funding made available by the Phoenix Convention Center. It remains true that arts and culture are a good investment of these funds. Thank you for your time.
Our next speaker in Upper Council Chambers is Ryan Boyd, followed by Sarah Gaumont.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the Executive Committee. For the record, Ryan Boyd with the Urban Phoenix Project. Let me start with the fact that I owe the city manager an apology for some statements that I had made in the previous Monday. However, I remain concerned about the process that has gone under with this, really feeling blindsided at the Streets and Storm Drainage Subcommittee, and furthermore feeling frustrated with the reprioritization of lower-ranked projects, and frankly, projects that had less public comment support than Vision Zero and equity-based transportation mobility. I ask that we restore what the public has come forward and told you is an important priority and something that cannot be deferred by any mention as we continue on with this process. We need this funding to save lives. And frankly, all projects are scalable, because when we do reduce $8 million from equity-based transportation, or $9 million from Vision Zero, you're cutting projects that are going to save lives in historically underinvested communities. Thank you for your time.
I see that we have 3 more speakers from Phoenix Center for the Arts. Sarah Gaumont, Cadell Grissinger, and Kim C. Are they yielding their time? Thank you so much.
Hi, thank you so much. My name is Sarah Sullivan. I'm on the leadership team at Rising Youth Theater. We've been resident organs at Phoenix Center for the Arts for as long as we've existed, 10 years. And I'm just voicing my support for the renovations for Phoenix Center for the Arts. It is truly an art center that is at the center of our community, that is creating spaces for people to access arts programming who would not otherwise, and truly engaging deeply. We have been working with really challenging conditions for 10 years, and this would be a transformative amount of money to do these renovations and to allow us to continue to deepen and grow in Central Phoenix. Thank you.
Our next speaker in Upper Council Chambers is Joseph Ehrlichman, followed by Nora Uyoya.
My name is Joseph Ehrlichman. I've been an attorney here in Phoenix for 55 years. I'm also a Holocaust survivor, and I'm here in that capacity, not as an attorney. The Arizona Jewish Historical Society is very much involved in education, because it is their view, and it is my view, that education is sorely needed to correct some terrible misunderstandings, denials, and so forth that is rampant in the Holocaust area. We believe that making an emotional connection to the Holocaust, which can only be made by survivors who are dying very quickly. I'm one of the young ones. I'm 82. I certainly condone all of their work and work that is similarly done in that area. Thank you.
Our next speaker in Upper Council Chambers is Nora Uyoya, followed by Matthew Schaefer.
Good morning. My name is Nora Uyo. I'm the superintendent of Fowler Elementary School District, which is Southwest Phoenix. I live in Central Phoenix. I have lived in 4 residences up and down Central Phoenix. My own children were able to benefit from many resources, libraries, every amenity imaginable. The children I've worked with for 20 years literally have nothing within their immediate commuting space. Only recently have they gotten access to public transportation. There is no library anywhere near them. These are children who live in poverty. We have summer school every year so that they can eat, be in cool spaces, and be safe. People who are able to benefit from Mark T. Hans Park have the transportation and the resources. My children do not. So it would be nice for them to just have a safe space to play and a nice resource of books. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Our next speaker in Upper Council Chambers is Matthew Schaefer, followed by Lisa Perez.
Madam Chair, members of the Executive Committee, as you know by now, I am the Managing Director of the Phoenix Theater Company and have worked for the company for 16 years, navigating accessibility issues in our city-owned building each day across those 16 years. I'm here to advocate for full funding of our proposed project on behalf of theater artists and aspiring artists from age 5 to 100 with mobility limitations. These artists are seeing the world becoming more welcoming and equitable to them each day. I urge the committee to fund the joint ADA project between the City of Phoenix and the Phoenix Theater Company to allow these artists to participate in the Phoenix Theater Company's programming, including our summer camp for the youngest of these artists. Thank you for all your hard work.
Our next speaker in Upper Council Chambers is Lisa Perez, followed by Chaz Salazar.
Thank you.
This is my third appearance here at the Executive Committee, and it doesn't please me always have to come down at 9 o'clock on a Monday, but this is how important this project is to me. And the speakers that I have followed, we had 2 superintendents of Title I schools speak to you, the importance of having these extra resources for our children that live down there. But also I just want to reiterate the point that I always do, in that there's no other funding source. And as Inger pointed out, this is only phase 1 of this project. So we've already waited over 20 years for this project. By the time this park is fully built out, 10 to 15 more years that we're going to wait for this park. So I urge you, thank you very much for the productive discussion on equity. Just really want to continue to support the Estrella Civic Space and Estrella Library and how important it is to the quality of life to all the residents on the west side of Phoenix. Thank you.
Our next speaker in Upper Council Chambers is Chaz Salazar, followed by Laura Earl.
Good morning. My name is Chaz Salazar. I'm a flutist, teaching artist, and musical activist from South Phoenix. I am here to urge the committee to fully fund the life-saving Vision Zero project and the equity-based transportation mobility program. Both of these programs are about saving lives, keeping our streets safe, and connecting residents to the new parks and services that are also being funded in the bond. I'm also in full support of the Estrella Civic Space project and in full support of the projects in the Environmental and Sustainability Subcommittee. And thank you, Subcommittee Chairwoman Torres, for all the hard work you're doing. And I just want to urge all of the committees to continue to center equity, focusing on communities of color and underinvested parts of the city, which are South and West Phoenix. Thank you.
Our next speaker in Upper Council Chambers is Laura Earl, followed by Rabbi Jeffrey Chesnell.
Good morning. My name is Laura Earl, and I would like to express gratitude for Chairwoman Wilcox and others that expressed the need to move the Estrella Civic Space higher on the list. It's a very important addition to our area of the city, and as you move forward with the deliberation of this bond, that you continue to keep the Estrella Civic Space as a high priority. Thank you.
Our next speaker in Upper Council Chambers is Rabbi Jeffrey Chesnell, followed by Caroline Van Slyke.
In accordance with the instructions to only have 1 speaker per organization, I yield.
Thank you. Our next speaker in Upper Council Chambers is Caroline Van Slyke, followed by Vania Guevara.
Good morning. I'm Caroline Van Slyke. I live in South Roosevelt, downtown, and I agree with equity and the struggle. I'm just here to ask if you do have some extra money for Hance Park. I live in South Roosevelt, so I don't live in North Roosevelt. And it'd be just really great to have a place where we can go with our family and let our kids ride their bikes around, and there's not all this construction, that we could just get some of the stuff done. And I'd love the arts to be, because I'm a mom and I have my kids here, and it's great to have programs inside the donut, not just all around, because that'll help with green space, and so I don't have to drive and those kinds of things. So that's all I ask. Thanks.
Our next speaker in Upper Council Chambers is Vania Guevara, followed by Taylor Earl.
Yetutek Muchiamahemet Vania Guevara. I'm here to express my support for Vision Zero and the equity-based transportation mobility. I just really want to urge you, encourage you all, beg you all to redefine and rethink, reframe how we talk about safety. I don't think that our firefighters' goal is to answer as many calls as possible or to address and reach out to people who are in need in the streets. And I think we have an opportunity here to really be proactive and look at road infrastructure, safety, bike lanes as a way to really talk about how our community members experience feeling safe and having access and being able to enjoy the city that we all love and care about. I personally love to ride my bike. It's my favorite time to experience me time or to go to a park, but I would never in my life expose my nieces to the streets where I live and put their lives at risk, and I should really extend that same level of love and care to myself. But again, I just want to really urge you to reconsider and fully fund Vision Zero and transportation for our community members, especially those in underinvested communities. Thank you for your time. Tasukamati.
Our next speaker in Upper Council Chambers is Taylor Earl, followed by Corinne Goff.
Good morning. For your record, I'm Taylor Earl. I just want to thank you for re-examining the parks elements. Also, just a correction, last week you heard that the Parks Director had ranked the Estrella Civic Center, and I actually echoed that in my statement. And I was able to clarify with the Director that she wasn't involved in any ranking, but may have been how she presented the list that it was misunderstood. So I just wanted to clarify that. Now, as you move forward in the final recommendations, I just want to echo what Ms. Inger Erickson said and that Lisa Perez echoed as well, which is that this is just the phase 1 of the Civic Center. Not phase 1 of 3, but phase 1 of 2. I thought there were 3 phases earlier. But what I was clarified is that it is the design and construction of 1/3 of the park amenities. So it is quite a bit scaled. So as you look into these final things and the final pushing and pulling, I would just recommend that we continue to keep it as is and not try to scale it any further, because it has already undergone that type of scaling. And frankly, I think that scaling makes sense. Getting something there and getting us started, and it could be cleaned up, and maybe the rest of it could be done in a later bond. So I emphasize this just to keep it where it's at, and again, thank the committee for its work and re-examining.
Our next speaker in Upper Council Chambers is Corinne Goff, followed by Kate Wells.
Hello, I direct the Applied Health Policy Institute at U of A. Views are my own and don't represent the university as a whole. Please fully fund Vision Zero, T2050, and heat resiliency. All 3 items are urgent for walkability, safety, and equity. Vision Zero is about road safety in general, but prioritizes walkability because 65% of fatal crashes in Phoenix involve someone outside an automobile. Our streets are so dangerous that people can't leave their houses without the protection of a car. Some of these existing funds and other sources of funds, especially those that people today talked about for trees, these are enough for pilot projects and streets here and there. We need funding that is sufficient for more systemic changes throughout the city. We routinely spend more than $700 million per mile on things like freeways, and we should do the same for people outside of cars. Walking and biking are not just recreation. They are or should be core transportation. 28% of trips are less than a mile. Almost 1/3 of people can't drive because of age or disability, and we take for granted that many of these people literally stay at home in social isolation instead of participating in public life.
Our next speaker in Upper Council Chambers is Kate Wells, followed by Karen Gresham.
Sorry, my foot's really asleep from sitting for so long. Madam Chair and committee members, thank you for all your hard work and thoughtful consideration of all these important projects. I want to take this time ahead of your consideration of the Arts and Culture Subcommittee next week to share with you some more information about the Children's Museum project. The museum has actually gone back to our construction consultants, Ryan Companies, and asked to better understand the consequences of us scaling back our project. Ryan Companies have recommended not scaling our project because of the extremely complex and architectural and structural challenges in this 110-year-old building. The estimate in current dollars to scale our project over 2 bonds would add an additional $1.1 to $1.5 million to the overall project and cause unnecessary disruptions to the museum's operations twice. Thanks for your consideration of this new information and for consideration of our project in its entirety that will serve over 500,000 children and families a year. Thank you.
Our next speaker in Upper Council Chambers is Karen Gresham, followed by Kenneth Steele.
Good morning. My name's Karen Gresham. I'm a 3rd-generation Phoenician, parent to 3 teenage boys, and although I'm here speaking solely on behalf of myself, I'm a governing board member in a Central Phoenix school district. So I want to also advocate for fully funding the Vision Zero. I was so happy that finally passed, as well as the heat resiliency programs. Our students deserve safe places to walk, to bike to school. Our district cannot find or hire any additional crossing guards. They don't want to do it. Our students cross busy streets in Central Phoenix. The drivers are not paying attention. And in addition, I'm a triathlete. I've biked hundreds of miles of roads, but I refuse to ride my bike in Phoenix. I drive out to Scottsdale, Fountain Hills, because it's just not safe here. So we need safer roads. We need the original amounts for these programs. These are vital programs, but they won't be effective unless we're fully funded at the recommended amounts. And even though we have a large, very large city, we can still have a healthy and safe city. So thank you.
Our final speaker in upper council chambers is Kenneth Steele.
Greetings, Madam Chair, members of the Executive Committee. My name is Kenneth Steele. I'm with Pinnacle Prevention. We're a nonprofit based in the East Valley, but we do serve Arizona statewide. And we work to cultivate a just food system and opportunities for joyful movement in order for individuals and families to move with joy throughout their communities, meaning that they have the ability to bike to the park, to walk their dog, or simply just to get to work, to get to school, or to get to the bus stop. We have to be investing in the redesign of our streets and in the redesign of our intersections. The issue with pedestrian fatalities and injuries is tremendous in the city. We all know this. And that's why I'm supporting that we fully fund the Vision Zero and equity-based transportation mobility portions of the Go Bond project. In these times, families are having to decide, do I fill my gas tank? Or do I buy groceries for my kids and for my family and take the rail? So as we have more folks on the streets, this is going to continue to be a problem that affects our lower income families. So let's prioritize this. Let's get our streets safer sooner rather than later. Thanks.
Madam Chair, that was our final speaker.
Thank you very much. This concludes the public comment period, and I want to thank all of you who have participated today. Let me ask committee members if you have any brief remarks in response to public comment.
Madam Chair, I just have one, and it relates to public comment from the last time. I just want to thank the Phoenix Theater team for providing the information about the project for which they're fundraising and how it relates to and is different from the ADA access issue. So I just want to thank you for submitting that the last time. It's very helpful.
Thank you. Other comments? Based on today's discussion, do any committee members have requests for future meeting agenda items? If not, our next meeting is November 14th, where we will continue our deliberations and possibly formulate recommendations. So with that, thank you all. The meeting is adjourned.